Welcome back to Torque Test channel. Recently, a viewer, Luke, asked us to use Pushy, our automated wrench-turning robot, to try to find which brand uses the highest quality, strongest steel alloy. The stand-in tool he suggested for this effort is the infamous 1/2 to 3/8 square drive adapter because, well, we all kill them at some point, and each brand has that simple 3/8 square cross-section of their chosen material to put forth and resist the twisting of our machine, allowing us to collect and rank that data and those brands, basically. Not because you should be using adapters like this, though you may in a pinch like I do, but because it's a better than most example of a tool that you can't fool all that much. The strongest in design and material will come out on top. In that video, many of you asked about modern versus old school steel examples. For example, we tested a Husky from Home Depot, but back in the day they made these in the US, so we bought one of those. We, for example, tested Snap-on's one-piece model they no longer make. What about their current two-piece offering? Old versus new, Craftsman US versus Craftsman owned by Stanley today, out of Taiwan, and even Stanley owned Crescent years ago was Taiwan, now is China-Vietnam mixture. Essentially, have things been getting worse, or are we headed in the right direction? As well as a few brands added in to the mix like Tone, Stahlwille, Milwaukee, and more added to the ranking for the first time. Let's start with one of these old versus new comparisons. This is the 1/2 to 3/8 Husky adapter I just mentioned from Home Depot, and this is the Husky USA made adapter from decades past. The last time they made sockets and stuff like this out of the US was about 1998. Last time out for us, the modern, like as in you can still buy it from Home Depot, Husky made 266.3 Newton meters, which is what Pushy's gauge measures in, and that's 196 foot-pounds, which is middle of the road, nothing special, but not bad either. This is the US Husky adapter. While a little bit more expensive, even in 1990s dollars, the US version makes it up to 280.9 Newton meters, 207 foot-pounds, about 6% better. Sort of a strange failure mode as well, a crack propagated from the spring ball retainer down to the neck here and cracked along this edge. Haven't seen one quite like that before. It's also, and maybe this is why it looks odd there, strangely hard, like 10 points Rockwell C harder, 52.7 is like, well, it's usually maybe too hard or borderline, but they seem to get away with it. 207 is quite good. Okay, now we have 3 tool examples that are all among the lower priced per piece options and also all performed about the same. So we're going to work through them here. Harbor Freight Pittsburgh, Aries, and Performance Tools. Since we tested Icon from Harbor Freight last time, a lot of you asked how that compares to Pittsburgh. So today we're going to add that to the list. Made in China, that Pittsburgh, unlike its Icon brother, which is made in Taiwan. And like these two, Aries and Performance Tool are both made in Taiwan. Though, as I said, all finish about the same, all said. Pittsburgh, 201 foot-pounds, a big decrease from Icon, though with Icon on the screen here, it does get way up there, so it makes for a spread from most things. And we bought 5 sets of these Icon examples across several months, and they tested all like this, so it seemed like good data to us. Aries is going to see 200 foot-pounds, and the Performance Tool, 199 foot-pounds. All of them basically without drama, twisting on themselves, slowly just turning that 3/8 square drive off of the tool. Though we don't have hardness to thank for any piece of this data alone, we think so. At least we got, after removing their chrome finish as usual, 42.7, 49.6, and 43.3 Rockwell hardness on these. Not so much different to the Icon, which is made out of 4140 chromoly, while these are all each CRV. Yes, these are each marked with the CRV for their material. Chrome vanadium is not a bad thing. 6150 alloy, for example, when heat treated very well, is very good. Chromoly, when heat treated equally well, can simply have some advantage at times, as seen here, regardless of that specific hardness shown. All right, time to throw a wrench into the gears here of this whole conversation with the absolute cheapest on the day. Well, cheapest to date, as it was the cheapest we could find, period. This is the Sir Christie, a $6 set from Amazon, shipped about $1.50 a piece. We had requests for AliExpress, but with shipping, these are about half the price of set off of AliExpress, so it's worth a shot. These are basically no-name, non-branded adapters, just say chrome vanadium. They're made in China, and this is how it does. 277.2, 205 foot-pounds. Yeah, did not call that. The U-Tool Mart was the last cheap one we tested that we got for $6 as a single piece, and that did just 164 foot-pounds. Now you might be thinking, is that a fluke then? Well, we had some foresight. In case it did super well or super poorly, we took that $6 gamble and bought 2 sets instead of 1. And the second one did 279 newton meters even, or about 206 foot-pounds now. Really not shabby. Pretty high in hardness as well. That CRV is 48.7. Now what you should do with this info, as they're not a tool brand, I'm not sure, haven't a clue, but you all wanted to see it, and it's a pretty interesting result, I think. Let's look at another old versus new comparison, this time with Crescent Tool and not really going all that far back. It's a global marketplace these days, and things are changing from brands very quickly and often, as it seems. With Crescent, they were recently in Taiwan a couple years ago, and this new Crescent says a product of Vietnam finished in China, whatever that means. So some of the results today, we're curious, not just vintage USA versus now, but what direction in general are tools moving when it comes to, well, for one thing, material selection, processing, and basically durability. Now is a good time to mention placing a wooden block here or not, or a large wooden block versus a small one makes no difference. The transducer is up here in the center of this whole swing. Pushing from this end can come in the form of anything you want. The pushing end comes from pushy, and his job is to do one thing and one thing only, do so harder and harder until something breaks. Here is the first Crescent Tools made in Taiwan. It's going to put up a good result, 289.5, 214 foot-pounds. That's some of the best we've seen up there, where mainly just Japanese, German, and US made examples exist. And here is the Vietnam-China combo. 275.2, so 203 foot-pounds. Not bad by any stretch of the imagination, especially, I mean, consider the application it's being used in, but also we're seeing with Husky and Crescent Tools so far, well, sort of moving in the wrong direction, it would seem. Let's take another stab at things. This is the Craftsman USA made 1/2 to 3/8 reducer socket. Classic Sears Craftsman, American made. They probably made a bajillion of these things over the years, and this is a modern day, like, Lowe's sold Stanley owned Craftsman made in Taiwan, we think, as it wasn't labeled. It's supposed to be labeled, but the DeWalt hanging next to it, also made by Stanley, was made in Taiwan, so assume Taiwan. The new retail Craftsman makes a lot like the others we've been seeing, 199 foot-pounds, sort of just, yeah, that'll work sort of territory. And here is the more vintage, at this point, Craftsman USA. 292.6, 216 foot-pounds, basically good enough to be in the top 5 we've ever tested, and a tie with Right Tools USA, so yeah, that's pretty good. And very hard as well. This was 53 Rockwell, more than 10 points different now than its overseas counterpart, so likely a different material, I would assume, and very similar to the Husky, both oddly high hardness. Maybe they use the same factory facility for both of these, though separated by about a decade, so there is some difference in shape there as well, and a bit in the results too. Let's check out another popularly requested example, the Milwaukee. This was requested quite a bit. We avoided it initially because a lot of their sockets are Vietnam lately, and this is China still, so unsure if it's going to change soon, but nevertheless, will be good to have on the record here. They use this square design shape on the outside of all of their sockets, which prevents it from rolling away from you, which I think makes sense for construction, like resting it on top of a ladder or a 2x4 up high. But for mechanics, I never really saw the upside of having a 3/4 inch square on all your sockets, even on their small ones. For clearance reasons, never really added up for me. But that said, she don't play. The Milwaukee adapter is very stout. We're talking just shy of 300 here in newton meters, 215 foot-pounds, about where US Craftsman was, which is to say, very good. China doesn't even have a traditional domestic supply of chromoly's, so this is likely just a very good example of well heat-treated CRV at a Rockwell hardness of 48.5. Those upper 40s, maybe up to 50 even, would be my target for such a tool, and this does pull this off. This is Bonnie, a vintage USA-made tool, a brand not really around anymore these days, and it suffers a bit, I assume at least, from its hardness. A low hardness in this case. Not that you can't make a durable tool in lower hardness, it's just more of an uphill battle when we're talking just twisting here, not having to deal with impacting forces that would make high hardness more of a liability. This Bonnie sees 269.1, 199 foot-pounds, and it slots right in there with most of the pack. Next up is Carlisle, that Napa house brand. This is Taiwan and CRV again, as marked on the side. Starting to get rather expensive, as well as this was $12 for a single adapter. Let's see how it does. The Carlisle is going to be another one that, by putting up 273 here, falls into the popular mid-ground area of 201 foot-pounds and does the old-fashioned twist in a big way. So we're moving on to Tone at a full 16 bucks, though no doubt probably cheaper in its domestic market of Japan. This Japanese tool brand is known for some pretty sweet tools, and like a lot of Japanese tools, it saves on space where possible. This is the shortest example of an adapter like this on the day. Here's how it does. The Tone comes into an unexpected halt in torque at just 239.8, which is 177 foot-pounds, astonishingly. At which point, it's a bit stuck on the socket, twisted up in there. Upon being pried off, it looks like this. Not all that dramatic, just a crease at the base, and that was enough for it to stop putting up a fight in torque. And here we have another import, though across a different pond from Germany. We have the Stahlwille. This was $18 and features the classic matte chrome finish and knurling you might expect from a German hand tool manufacturer. And this example is made in Germany, unlike a growing number of German hand tools these days made in Taiwan, growing every year. Let's see how it gets on. The Stahlwille makes it up to 291.9, mighty high, good for 215 foot-pounds, and fairly up there amongst our entire list of tools to date. Very good. Okay, and up next we have the most expensive and most requested piece. It's Snap-on. This is the Snap-on SVA4 they've stopped making, and this is the Snap-on GSAF1F at 27 bucks. We didn't buy their current black finish model last time because when something's black finish, a lot of our viewers just skipping throughout our video would wonder why we're including an impact adapter with a bunch of chrome hand tool pieces. But this is, for the record, non-impact use only, everyone. Even stamped into the piece to let you know. What is unique about it is it has a replaceable square drive end. No doubt Snap-on was warranting out so many of the old chrome model. Just swapping out this 3/8 square when someone gets a bit too ambitious with this tool is a lot simpler, or at least cheaper to stock and replace for free. They also stamp into this tool, though, 2,000 inch-pounds as a limit. That's just 167 foot-pounds, which is the last reason we didn't test it. Was thinking, well, that's not very high, 167. Let's find out how literally you should take that warning, as Pushy's gonna find out here, as usual. 394.9, almost 400 newton meters. That's 291 foot-pounds, and a clean break right where you probably expect it to be at the opening of that sort of socket half of their adapter. I wouldn't call this a piece of cake to remove, sort of have to prop it up while pushing the pin in and grab the end with some vice grips, in our case, to get it out. And then you'll find this, probably the only off-corner loading technology 4-point socket you're ever likely to see in your lifetime. We also found this socket end to be, strangely, 35.7 hardness, lower than the ASME standard for a socket, and the replaceable square end to be 51 hardness. Very hard. In fact, this is probably something more simple, this socket end like 1045 steel, or just processed with lower heat treatment. And this could be made from more expensive tool steel like S2 or A2 tool steel with its naturally higher hardness when heat treated, and still keep costs down, as the expensive part is simple in shape and small to replace. Not that that cost is low for you, I mean it is Snap-on, but like the replacement cost for them to swap them out with warranty. It's got to be a mixture of this design, a square drive post in a square drive socket, and the ability to use a much more expensive material for that post sticking out. That makes for this increase, as 291 is by far the most we've seen, a lot higher than would have assumed, and a lot higher than the 167 that's written on the outside of it. And in fact, before we reorder all of these to include our past testing, this is the only example we've tested that has seen an increase in torque in their later model example, and it's the only one with a redesign and keeping the same country of origin, USA. But we don't feel the ticket is necessarily USA made alone. The Bonnie here is an example of that. Icon Taiwan being nearly unbeatable up to now in this Taiwan versus Vietnam China crescent. I think the takeaway here is, are today's tools getting worse or at least less durable? We think, well, yeah, sort of, like with an average brand over time, kind of, yeah. That's the trend we see here and largely been seeing with testing other tools. It's not a rule, but more like a plague that some have been able to avoid by washing their hands of it. You have to assume Husky didn't move away from USA made to make tools stronger. It was to save cost and offer them at a lower price. Craftsman, well, went out of business speedrunning that move towards the end of their life cycle before they were bought up as Stanley, sort of as the brand name. We've seen it with adjustable wrenches that were Swedish and now just impossible to buy Swedish anymore. Maybe you've seen it a lot with brands you know. The lesson, the takeaway we feel is, as a trend, it's hard to say it's not been happening, and it really is being pushed by the consumer and their purchasing habits. These aren't just evil corporations. They're following or sometimes being forced into these directions, but not all of them are or have. Snap-on staying USA made and even improving on the item, though maybe not as compact as before. Stahlwille has it, at least on these pieces, still German, and even Harbor Freight. They sold these already, the Pittsburgh, before making Icon ones, which in hand tools, Icon is still pretty much exclusively Taiwan, and even using chromoly when they don't have to. These are all examples of the more expensive route we should patronize if we want examples like these to continue to be around. And not just one example. If everyone buys just Icon, I don't think it's going to happen. You need many of these to create the competition. After all, the only thing keeping Icon in Taiwan and using chromoly maybe is the existence of Snap-on. If you look at their marketing, Pittsburgh could become made in India or the Philippines or a mixture of the two by next year. There's nothing stopping that, as price is the main driving force for sales in this line. But if Icon moves from Taiwan in a search for a cheaper product, you better believe there would be channels like ours and others calling them out for it, us testing to see that difference. Their entire image and marketing that mentions Snap-on all the time could collapse overnight. So having other top quality examples is the only way things like these can continue to exist. Yes, support US workers if that's important to you, but always, if you can, I feel when it comes to long-lasting durable tools, support brands that you recognize, brands that have been around long enough to earn their name for you, and ones that didn't cash in on that name recognition in a quick get-rich scheme to line their shareholders' pockets in a short-term buying the most simple and cheap product possible, then charging you more just due to their name. That last part was all opinion, of course. If you feel differently, head over to the comment section and share your thoughts with others in a civil way, ideally. Our comment section is often better at that than most. Thanks for watching. We make episodes like these each Friday.